say, the format and the rules of the webinar of today. First of all, I just started recording, so I hope everybody is okay with that. So we can also use this webinar at a later stage in CitiDem as a kind of agenda setting moment, right? The program for today will start indeed with 3 experts working on citizen assemblies, having various different positions and theoretical approaches to citizens assemblies, and I will introduce them to you in a second. After their presentations, we'll have more or less 20 minutes for Q&A, and then we have a second part of the webinar where we are more closely looking at ongoing events like Democratic Odyssey I mentioned and others, and we'll look a little bit more at the practice. As I've been saying before, we did a very undeliberative thing by closing video and audio of the participants for today's webinar, but you're free to put your questions in the chat, which we can then indeed put to our experts and other speakers later on in our event. So that's for the introduction for today. I'm just looking at my co-hosts to see if a kind of special guest is already available, because we have a representative of the Parliament of Oost-België, so the German-speaking part of Belgium, with us today, but she can only make it in the first hour of the webinar, so we thought to give her the floor before our 3 keynote speakers will give their talks, and she will briefly introduce us and highlight to us the citizen empowering dimension of the Oost-Belgian model, of which many of you will know is a very peculiar and unique model in terms of its being institutionalized as a kind of permanent system of citizens' assemblies. Sebastian, is she amongst the participants?
Eva Jochenen, she is basically the person in charge of ensuring that this model goes on. I was just checking right now, but I think she might be having some issues joining. So perhaps we can try to introduce her if she manages to join the meeting at a later stage.
Okay, no problem.
Otherwise, Eva, I think there might be some technical issue. I think she just reacted in the chat that she's with us. Perhaps you see my name two times. If you could also make her a co-host so that you can...
I don't see her in the list.
It should be under my name, but 2 times.
Okay. Just a second, sorry. No, I can't see her, unfortunately. Maybe now it works. Let's see.
Let's see if that works.
No, it doesn't seem to work for now. I would say let's move on at least with our first speaker, and then we can see if we can pin Eva later on in the discussion. And I'm really delighted because I think we have 3 really fantastic speakers on a topic that is rather complex, particularly, I think we will all agree, in current times of major, and this is an understatement, major threats to representative liberal democracy, and not least in Europe, but not only there, of course. And so I would also invite the speakers in that sense, in a way, to reflect on what innovators of democracy can also offer in a way in terms of strengthening or defending democracy, which seems to be increasingly a major issue for us. And I will start with Andrea Felicetti, who obtained his PhD in Australian National University. He's currently senior assistant professor at the Department of Political Science of the University of Padova, a beautiful university, by the way. He worked in many different research centers in Belgium, in France, in Italy. And indeed, he has a very strong expertise in democratic theory, public spheres, and also I think in terms of a more specific and for us a very useful angle to deliberative democracy from the perspective of social movements. So please go ahead, Andrea. You will have more or less 15 minutes, and I'm really looking forward to your thoughts and considerations.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, for the invitation, and thank you for everybody attending this webinar. I'm very happy to share with you some ideas about democratic innovations in the contemporary context and essentially how to make use of them in a useful manner. When I saw the title of the event, it was a bit challenging for me to think about how to make citizen assemblies resonate with the public, because it's not like it's great. These are great times for pushing the boundaries of democracy. I mean, the boundaries are being pushed by the opposite direction, probably, with respect to the ones we intend to promote through democratic innovations. So, in any case, my idea is that when we think about democratic innovations and citizen assemblies are one among many possible democratic innovations, usually in the academic study of this, we can go back to the first authoritative book on the topic that was originally written by Graham Smith in 2009. And I think we must acknowledge that 2009 was a time very different from the one we are in nowadays. The prospect back then was one of democratic deepening, and nowadays I think it's not like that prospect has disappeared altogether, but there is an urge to defend democracy in the first place. And that's largely because the role of institutions is quickly changing as they become more and more populated by populist, generally far-right populist actors. That it's not they are against democratic innovations. Most of the times they ignore them altogether, but seem to find problems with the state of current democracy. So that is, we don't have a background that welcomes democratic deepening very often when we look at institutions. That doesn't mean it is impossible for this kind of context to emerge. Somewhere here and there we find some of that, and I think we should make use of it. But I think it's important to look elsewhere as well for us to have democratic innovations, citizen assemblies that can bite, that can stick to the idea of democratizing our societies. And so if we look beyond institutions, and I think we have a lot to look at. First of all, in doing that, however, before doing that, we should remember and tell ourselves that whether democratic innovations, including citizen assemblies, can resonate with the public or not, does not depend only on matters of design. In as much as scholars can help illuminate the discussion on the democratic innovation, probably only part of the solution has to do with the way we design democratic innovations. Much more has to do, in my view, in my understanding, with being able to learn from practices. So essentially, if we look beyond institutions, we know that democracy has always been innovated. Social movements have done that for a long time. In the 60s, mostly in the 70s, social movements started to practice democracy in a different way that was then formalized in more systematic terms within academia. But essentially, it largely started this movement to change democracy from real life, not from within academia. Academia came later. And these proposals had the perk of being radical. So the ideational landscape that they came from was one of radical democracy. So Yves Sintomer, that will be a speaker, has written extensively about this in much better terms than what I can express now. But I think sticking to this radical nature of democratic innovations is important nowadays. Why is that? When we are making democratic innovations today, nobody essentially, or many of us, do not expect them to revolutionize anything. It's mostly a reformist approach to problems that we have. Try to solve this, try to talk about that, try to fix that other problem. The idea that a democratic innovation as such can have systemic impact, revolutionize anything, has been lost. And I think this is realistic. It's welcome to a great extent. But as long as we work within the remit of this very narrow way of conceiving what democratic innovations need to do, we are serving the system that is going in a direction that is not democratization. So, 10, 15 years ago, we could do this and be happy with it. But nowadays, we cannot do that without the risk of being ineffective in democratic terms. So a more democratic, radical democracy imaginary is needed, not just in the rhetoric of it, but in the very way we think about it. I myself, in the first place, I've never thought of it in these terms, but I think it's more and more needed because the times have changed. And those idealistic dimensions that we do not give with democratic innovations, perhaps, are being given by someone else. By populist actors that do not spare their rhetoric when it comes to the need for changing the system. It's just that they want to go in a very different direction. Another aspect has to do with practices is that democratic innovations, when they were tied to what social movements were doing, well, essentially were something done for the purpose of being useful. So why are we doing this for? If we are doing democratic innovations for the sake of a benefit that is not mostly the democratization of the system, then it will not be serving the democratization of the system. So it's the way we think about them that I think it's very important. So this is not to say that democratic innovation, the way we are doing, are wrong. Far from it. It's not like institutions are hopeless, but we need to ground these ideas much more firmly in publics. Now, this leads me back to the original question, that is, may assemblies help to bring, how to make citizen assemblies resonate with the public? I think, honestly, they cannot do that to a great extent. I mean, there are cases where this has happened in France at the national level, perhaps, in some local experiments, maybe, but as such, democratic innovations are not drivers of public enthusiasm. And I think we should acknowledge this. It's not necessarily a failure when this happens. I think it cannot be otherwise often. We should acknowledge it and make democratic innovations part of a larger struggle for democracy. in doing that, democratic innovations are not the centerpiece. They are at the margin. They might gain more ground, that's welcome, but for sure, we cannot go all the way by ourselves as democratic innovators, so to speak. But we cannot even expecting of leading the way. We are tools in the hands of those struggling for democracy. So we have lately, I think, DI, democratic innovation, DI-centric understanding of what we're doing. The reality is that we are a useful part of the democratic system, and we are just a small component of the wide coalition for democracy. So I think this places us in a perspective from which we can have we can reflect. So we don't need to resonate with the public. We are just not good at it in some ways. Perhaps I might be wrong. I might read new evidence that convinces me otherwise, but as of now, I think we are better to think of ourselves as doing a small but important job, bringing in some rationality in the debate, promoting an understanding of democracy that is slightly different, serving the idea that democracy needs to change and can go in a different direction. So these kind of contributions we can give, they're very small, they're important nevertheless. And then another way to think about this is
Andrea.
Yes.
Sorry, is it okay if you start wrapping up, because our person from Oost-Belgium would like to step in, and she needs to go. I'm sorry for that.
Oh, okay, no problem. Then so I even lost the track of what I was saying, so it's okay. But essentially, you get the overall point that I think we should be on the side of a broader coalition, which is really not it's really not granted that we are going to go in the direction we want. And so the ability to cooperate with other actors is really important at this point. I leave the floor to the next speaker, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I think you made a couple of really, really important points and extremely useful for our later discussion, which I think particularly stresses also the societal, the bottom-up, the role of social movements, etc. Let's indeed give the floor to Eva Jonen. I'm really delighted that you could join us, and sorry for the technological hiccups. I'm really curious to hear your position on how you think the Oost-Belgian model might be an inspiration for all of us. I hope you managed to.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thanks.
Yes, everything's fine. Thank you very much. So first of all, I'm very honored to speak here about the Oost-Belgian model. And it was also very interesting for me to hear the first speaker about, let's say, a more broader issues on what can be done with citizens' participation within the broader context of innovation in democracy. And I very much liked one sentence, if I interpreted it well. It was something about, instead of talking about a design of citizens' participations in a theoretic way, let's learn from practices. And only to tell you some words about the genesis of our model. Indeed, we started in 2011 to look at different practices throughout Europe And we started with our own process, the so-called Osbelgian model, only in 2019. So we took 8 years to look a bit around us. And the starting point really was a very practical model. Maybe you have already heard about this G1000, which is now an association based here in Brussels. But by the time in 2011, it was really a quite innovative thing they did to assemble 1,000 citizens throughout Belgium to decide about which topics would be to be told to the new Belgian government. It was during the Belgian government crisis. Well, this was our starting point. And so what are now the key points of our model after 8 years of various studies and the first test model? Well, as you have already introduced, Paul, the first key point certainly is the institutional way of this citizens' participation. We call that a permanent model of citizens' participation, and the permanent criteria are first, we have a regional law that regulates the whole process. Second, we have 2 permanent institutions within this process, and this is a secretary, a permanent secretary. Second, a citizens' council, which is a permanent institution of 30 citizens. And the whole process is connected to the parliament of the German-speaking community. Well, I don't know whether you know about the complicated Belgian state model. We cannot go in depth within 10 minutes, but let's put it like this. The German-speaking community is able to create such processes which are not decisive processes, but which can give recommendations. Okay, so we have this institutional aspect, decree, so legal basis, and permanent institution. Then a second key point certainly is how we organize the citizens' involvement. So we have a process of 3 topic choices. We foresee once a year a citizens' dialogue, and we make a public call also in the media, or especially in the media, and citizens can do their topic proposals. One citizen is enough, and then these proposals are analyzed by the permanent institution of these citizens' council, so the 30 people. And then once a topic is chosen, then we have, or in parallel, we have a kind of a random process. We send letters to 1,500 people throughout the German-speaking community. And we have a return about 150 people. And at the end, 30 people can participate in such citizens' assembly. And the citizens' assembly is the non-permanent part of this whole process. The citizens' assembly, they meet 5-6 times. They get input about the topic. They have to discuss the topic, they have to deliberate about, and then they give their recommendations. So second key point is involvement of citizens. third key point certainly is the impact and the guarantees that we give to that citizens dialogue. So based on the decree, the recommendations are given or are set in a document, and this document is given to the members of the parliament and of the government. And in a first public assembly with parliament and government, the citizens explain their recommendation. So what have they meant by, what were their concerns, etc. So this is a first public assembly in the parliament. Then the parliament has around 1 month's time to give a first statement on the recommendations. So if they see some major problems, if something maybe is already under work, if something else is not in the competence of the parliament of the German-speaking community, if something else has to be analyzed in depth, etc. So first statement after 1 month. And then the parliament has around 1 year to work on the recommendations with the government, and then a final report of the parliament is discussed now with the citizens' representatives. And I say citizens' representatives because, as I told you before, the Citizens' Assembly deals only with the specific topic. And after 1 year, the Citizens' Assembly doesn't exist anymore. This is a council discussing after 1 year with the parliament. But the council is composed by members that were former members of the citizens' assemblies, various citizens' assemblies. We have 1/3, let's say, of the council replaced every year, so that you have more or less 8 members of the citizen assembly dealing with the topic that are still present after 1 year when discussing, when the final discussion will take place with the parliament. Okay, this final discussion is not necessarily the full stop of the whole process, because some recommendations maybe cannot be transposed or they cannot be answered to within 1 year. So there's the possibility that during the whole legislation, the Council of the Citizens can put some questions to the parliament, and through the parliament to the government. Well, you promised that, or you told us that other. Where are you now with your action about our recommendations? So these may be really very in short for the key points of the process. Well, now I was asked to say something about the effects on democratic participation. Well, first of all, I would say we are a bit too early to have a really, how can I say, a serious answer on this kind of question. 5 years are not enough really to say, well, what is or will be the impact of democratic participation in Ostbelgien. You have also to know that we are in a quite specific frame in Ostbelgien. So even though we are an autonomous region, we are a strong minority in Belgium. So our region, autonomous region, is composed out of 80,000 people. So we are quite on a local level compared to other, let's say, dialogue settings. From the beginning on, we had a scientific accompaniment of the process, but the scientists were free up to now to look at this point or at the other point. So what was of interest rather for them. The University of Leuven is the key actor in this scientific accompaniment. And it's very fresh. Only since January this year, we had set up a scientific council. And we are now a bit broader on the scientific level. And one thing is really first to have a better databases on what's the impact on a political interest on the beginning for a participant of a citizens' assembly and what at the end. And what do we know about the public knowledge of the process? So I cannot give you now any scientific data to give you serious answers. I can only give you my personal opinion, my personal feelings about the impact on democratic participation. So first, what could we see? We had elections here in Belgium in June 24, and also our parliament, so the parliament of the German speaking community, was newly elected. And out of the citizens' assemblies, we had 5 candidates for the election of the parliament. So the thing what we don't know is what is the direct link from the participation in a citizens' assembly to the to be candidate to the regional elections. These we don't have any evidence on that. I can only make the constatation that 5 people that participated in citizens' assemblies has been candidates to the regional elections, and one of those candidates has been elected. So you see then also the link between participative and deliberative democracy. It's also very interesting to hear the opinions about the panel participants about what should be decided only by citizens or from citizens and deputies, so members of the parliament, and only by members of the parliament or only by government. This is quite interesting, but still we don't have scientific evidences about that. And secondly, so what we would like to be a part of their research now, of their scientific accompaniment, is the feeling that we have is that we are much better known in an expert public throughout the world, if you want to, than by the normal citizen in Ostbelgien, in the German-speaking community. If you ask people in the street, have you heard about the Bürgerdialog in Ostbelgien? 90% will say, never heard about, what's that? So there we have to see, so once a year to make a public call about, please give us topics to discuss in a citizens dialogue is fairly not enough to be publicly known by citizens. So I will stop here.
Excellent.
And thank you for your attention.
Extremely interesting, I think.
I cannot stay with you now, but please, if there are questions that will come up later, feel free to make an email, whatever.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very rich presentation and discussion. We might actually come back to you in one of our future webinars, so there might be other occasions. But it's really
Thank you very
inspiring.
much. And I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so that was an extremely interesting discussion, I suppose, of a pretty unique situation of a, well, I mean, one of the most interesting parts is, I think, the sort of the democratic community that Oost-Belgium seems to be creating between non-permanent assemblies and then a more permanent council. But that's a discussion maybe for later. Let's move on because time is going fast. We move on to the next announced speaker, let's put it like that, Melisa Ross, PhD from Humboldt Universität Berlin, currently postdoctoral researcher at the University of Bremen, and also a co-lead of what I suppose an extremely important network, the Global Citizens Assembly Network, for instance, being one of the most developed evaluators, it seems to me, of how citizens' assemblies actually work. She's also co-chair of the Standing Group of Democratic Innovations of the European Consortium for Political Research, and does all kinds of really interesting research, also, for instance, on the context of Latin America, which is, I think, particularly exciting also from this perspective. The floor is yours, Melisa.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks so much also to the CitiDem team for inviting me. And thanks to our audience who are being very patient with a long list of speakers. I'll try to be more or less brief. But I'm really excited to be here today because I think this conversation actually opens the door for a very important discussion to our field of inquiry and practice, namely, what is the place of citizens' assemblies and of citizen deliberation, public deliberation, in an extremely challenging contemporary political setting. And here, I think my points will tie in with what Andrea was mentioning before, namely, it's all nice and good when we think about innovative forms of engagement under a context of democratic deepening, but that context is gone, and we are most certainly in a different era. Also, I mean, for political institutions, for sure, for geopolitics, and most certainly also for citizen participation. And so I want to establish as a departure point for the discussion that I'm proposing 2 points. First, that I think it's unfair of proponents of citizens' assemblies to portray them as the solution to all possible political problems. And second, that it is unfair of critics of citizens' assemblies to hold them accountable for solutions they cannot possibly deliver. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean. Citizens' assemblies are, as we all know, of course, one single mechanism for engagement among a range of processes and institutions of what we call democratic innovations or social participation, political participation mechanisms beyond established traditional electoral representative institutions. And we have a large body of evidence on their many feats and benefits. Citizens' assemblies have demonstrated to be excellent at solving a number of political problems, but naturally they cannot possibly provide the solution to all the challenges our democracies face, from distrust and polarization to authoritarian derives or the live dismantling of the world's most powerful country and their democracy. So naturally, we cannot expect processes that engage 50, 60, 70 people in countries with 50, 60, 70 million people to actually sort the democracy crisis, let's say in the European context, for instance. That said, it doesn't mean that citizens' assemblies cannot provide valuable contributions to certain forms of political solutions and political decision-making. And so we know that they are fairer in terms of granting access to power to individuals that would have maybe never arrived to that table to have those discussions. We know that they have guarantees for inclusion of groups through individuals who have maybe never had a seat at the table to actually make political decisions. And we know that they have procedural checks and balances so that those individuals who have a seat at the table also have a voice and have equal voice in the table. However, we also know what's established, or at least contested and heatedly discussed in the literature, is that they cannot claim a mandate of legitimacy and representation of the broader public. So having established that, one mechanism among many that can have certain functions, but certainly not all of the functions, I want to move on to a discussion and here in a reflection that we're conducting with two colleagues, Lucy Parry from the University of Edinburgh and Nicole Curato from the University of Australia. Here I'm drawing on very recent research that we're conducting on the role of citizens' assemblies in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So we're looking, so as we were saying before, right, we have a lot of evidence of citizens' assemblies, mostly in the global north, mostly in OECD countries, mostly at the local level, mostly with generous funding. And so under conditions that are at least, if not sympathetic, certainly favorable to their emergence. We have less evidence of these processes happening under constrained or challenging settings, although very recent evidence, for instance, a process in Ukraine that recently took place. But so the question that we're asking, looking now specifically, not anymore at citizens' assemblies in this kind of well-established, advanced Western democracies, but looking at how they happen and what consequences they have in more fragile settings, what we're trying to figure out is, well, if citizen engagement doesn't have anything to contribute when democracies are challenged, then our entire field may be a bit misguided in what we're trying to do in terms of promoting and supporting democracy, so to say, to put it provocatively. And so we've come to some findings that I was thinking of sharing today, but also happy to discuss. I would be very interested in if people disagree with our findings. And what we're labeling the generative and the harmful, so to say, effects that citizens' assemblies can have in these fragile, these conflict-affected settings. Three very generative functions that citizens' assemblies can have, especially when democracies or political systems are challenging. First, they can link to decision-making, and in so doing, they can break political deadlocks. So we have powerful lobbying, powerful democratic or non-democratic actors, powerful institutional actors that may not be able to solve certain very conflicted, divisive political issues. In this context, citizens' assemblies have proven a very productive way to move forward in those apparently intractable political conflicts. Here, I'm thinking, of course, Ireland's Constitutional Convention, the French Climate Assembly. So problems that seem to have a society in their grasp, but where assemblies helped this discussion move forward. Second generative impact that citizens' assemblies can have is targeting inclusion, and by so doing, bridging deep division. So here we're considering, for instances in which societies are deeply divided, be it due to ethnic conflict, religious conflict, also the polarization, where certain societal groups and also political interests have trouble engaging with each other because the other's position is considered fundamentally illegitimate. In this context, citizens' assemblies provide for the conditions for these groups to actually come together and acknowledge each other, provide for the procedural checks and balances so that everybody has a voice in the process. And here I'm thinking, for instance, of Mostar's assembly, which was on waste management. So the topic was not exactly about a divisive issue, but the assembly was designed in a way that was very careful in terms of group ethnic and religious representation, and also enabled to develop trust, not only intergroup, but also with the government. Third generative use for citizens' assemblies, allowing negotiation and charting courses of action where interest may seem incompatible. So here I'm thinking, for instance, of Lebanon's assembly on energy and electricity, where assembly members, even if they were commissioned by public authorities, they were also very supportive of social movements, more radical demands. And so they operated a little bit as intermediaries between different more radical expectations in terms of energy transitions, but also accounting for the capacities and resources at hand that the state could actually devote to this. So negotiating. But we've also found that citizens' assemblies can be implemented in ways that are actually more harmful to the ends that they can pursue. at least three as well that I'll mention. First, they can instrumentalize participation if they're if they are deployed to pursue a predetermined end. And unfortunately, we have seen this in several cases where commissioning authorities have already made a decision on a public policy, have already ongoing measures that they intend to implement, and the Citizens' Assembly is used as a legitimation tool for a decision that was already made, so that the actual decision-making power remains, in any case, away from the hands of citizens, and in so doing, of course, brings into question the very fundaments of a citizens' assembly. Here, I'm thinking of one specific case, which is Gdansk's third citizens' assembly, where the municipality actually wanted to push forward the European Charter for Equality of Women and Men in local life. They call a citizens' assembly with a very broad remit, and the participants very quickly felt manipulated into voting for something that wasn't what they were interested in, that they felt an agenda pushed onto them. And interestingly, their recommendations were very much in line with the content of the Charter, but they rejected the Charter because they felt manipulated. Second example of a harmful use of the citizens' assemblies: depoliticizing cleavages and depoliticizing political problems. Even though some sectors in the practitioner sphere actually promote citizens' assemblies as a depoliticized arena, political questions are always political, and these spaces are impossibly apolitical. Inequalities are brought into the room with participants as in any other form of public sphere. Yet citizens' assemblies can be used to depoliticize issues when they are instrumentalized as well, to make decisions, to avoid difficult decisions, or to avoid difficult discourses where political problems are deeply polarizing, or where political problems actually put into question the very foundations of the system that allow for them to exist. Here I'm thinking, of course, of many climate assemblies. When expert testimonies, or where policy options brought to the table do not respond to the urgency of the climate crisis, but also maybe to the needs and demands of already mobilized groups, or the needs and demands in terms also from a global perspective of how we manage the climate crisis. Third and last, I'm almost concluding, third and last harmful use of the citizens' assemblies: disintermediation, so bypassing intermediary groups, which can have many forms, but also bypassing already mobilized groups that have a legitimate interest in having a seat and a voice at the table where policy decisions are made on issues that directly affect them. And here, so the instrument of sortition or stratified random selection can be used to actually bypass those groups and make sure that, for instance, their more radical demands and their more radical imaginaries are not even brought to the discussion. And here I'm thinking of the case of Bologna, celebrated as a hub of innovation, where a number of instances were developed for citizens to be engaged, for communities to talk to each other, the politics of proximity, while at the same time, social centers and cultural centers were being violently displaced, and social movements violently repressed by the police, who were already providing for those spaces of engagement that these new forums were supposed to create. They were already there. So 3 generative uses, 3 generative misuses that can lead to radically different consequences, especially in fragile contexts, even though we're talking about the very same institutional design, in some cases, the very same actors and practitioners leading these processes. This is a brief reflection from an immanent perspective, so to say. There's also much to be discussed in terms of what role citizens' assemblies have from a transcendency perspective, so to say, so their role in the broader participatory ecosystem, but I'll leave that to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was very rich and very dense, I suppose. And it immediately makes me think of if citizens' assemblies can be important in post-conflict situations, can they also be important in conflict situations? But we'll leave that to the discussion too, because we need to move on. Our third speaker, at least as cited on our bill on the way we promoted the event, is Yves Sintomer. I'm very, very happy to have Yves with us. I think one of the most more critical minds around citizens' assemblies, deliberative democracy, radical democracy. He's a professor of political science at Paris 8 University. He published fairly recently, very important book, The Government of Chance, on sortition and democracy from Athens to the present. And he also has recent work, which I find really inspiring, on different democratic imaginaries and how they relate to sortition, to citizen assemblies, etc. So please, Yves, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and to discuss with my colleagues and with the public. I share a lot of what has been said previously. I will share a PowerPoint. Do you see it well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fine.
Okay. I think we live, as it was said, quite contrasted situation. On the one hand, we have a real explosion of experiments with citizen assemblies. Just look at the specific case of climate assemblies, 200. Within a couple of years, it would have been 10 years before. But on the other hand, we have a context in which we have an authoritarian backlash. And the question is, in this context, what could citizen assemblies bring to democracy? And I will try to answer this through two main questions. So first, I will propose to differentiate three kinds of assemblies and try to see what kind is most interesting for democracy. And the second is, to what extent can citizen assemblies be embedded in a broader political system, and what does a political system mean? So, three types of assemblies. My basic claim is that we can differentiate basically three kinds of assemblies, not mainly because of their procedural differences, but according to their relationships to external actors. The first kind is to conceive the assembly as a kind of better pole. We all know, or most of us know, that the deliberative pole, the notion was invented by James Fishkin a couple of decades ago. The idea was to make a poll, but a deliberative one, putting people together, discussing well, with good information, balanced material. And at the end of the discussion, of the deliberation, you poll them again, and you have what Fishkin describes as the considered judgments of the public. And I think that to some extent, this idea has been extended to a lot of citizen assemblies which offer those with the power, both the administration and politicians, to have an access to the enlightened opinion of the public. So it's not necessarily polling, it can be an advice, but still it's directed to those who can decide. The second type, you have an empowered citizen assembly, and it functions as the jury model. I think the best example are the Irish citizens' assemblies. You have assemblies which function quite well, which are protected from external influences, which are at procedural level quite interesting, and they give an advice, proposal, which at the end of the day is can be decided by the citizen during a referendum at large. So they are much more linked to the decision-making process. They are not just advising, they are making propositions, which can be accepted or not, either by the government or by the citizens at large. But if it was only by the government, it won't have been that popular. The last type is much more politicized. It's also good, but it's more like an assembly, another assembly, in addition to those which exist at the time being. And I think the best example has been the French Citizen Convention for the Climate. The difference was that at procedural level, it was a bit messy, but the most interesting dimension of the Citizen Convention for the Climate in Paris was that the citizens had a lot of interactions with ecological social movements. It was not a closed assembly, it was an assembly in which a lot of members participated into demonstrations, discussions with social movements, and which had, to some extent, allies in the civil society. So the first model is only consultative. You can poll it or you can advise, but the most important feature is that the rulers can then cherry pick among the proposals of the assembly. The jury model is empowered. There is a direct link with the decision-making process, and the idea is that you hear opposite views. The impartiality is crucial. You have a neutral management, no or few contacts with external actors and the media. You avoid politicization. There is a strong procedural legitimacy, but one can wonder whether the political influence is enough in a time of authoritarian backlash. And the assembly model is empowered too. There is a more direct link with the decision-making process. The procedural fairness is only part of the story, and there is a politicization. The citizen assembly becomes a political actor and needs to make alliances to change both politics and society. The procedural legitimacy is weaker in the French case compared to the Irish case, for example, but perhaps the political influence is bigger. What type is better? I think it depends. I think that the poll model is interesting for the everyday work of public administration, but the risk is that you have a technocratic, apolitical, and powerless process in front of the authoritarian backlash. The jury model is quite interesting when you have to answer yes or no to one crucial issue. The risk is that you have a gap between the neutral deliberative sphere and the agonistic wider public sphere. The assembly model, it's interesting because it proposes a form of non-partisan agonistic politics, another kind of politicization. It takes power struggles seriously, but the risk is that you have a lower procedural legitimacy, and it's good when citizens interact with ecological social movements, but what if they interact with reactionary social movements or with vested interests? So I think that beyond the different types of assembly, we have to look at how they relate to the more global political system, and we have to reflect on what a system means. And this is my second part. The assemblies in a systematic perspective. We know that political theory has made a systematic turn, switching from the attention given to some particular democratic innovations to the deliberative system altogether. And it has potential advantages, and this also is clear for citizen assemblies. And I think that what my colleagues have told us before goes in this direction. You can have a much broader and integrated vision of democratic innovations and of democracy as a whole. There is no more one center in this. The disadvantages that you have is that in most of the literature, domination is absent or is seen as something like a pathology. The vision of the normal political system is Well, it functions well. And the role of deliberation within it is very optimistic. And to some extent, there is very often a shortcut between the ideal political theory and the non-ideal normative political theory. It's a theory for a very good world, but not very accurate for the world in which we live. And this is partly related to the conception of the system, which is proposed by most of the scholars on the deliberative systems. In the mainstream deliberativist vision, the systems, the paradigm of the system refers to the functional division of labor. It means that to some extent, everything is integrated, everything functions well with each institution has a role in this deliberative system, and the normal functioning of the system is functioning well. The problem is that when democratic innovations are really empowered, it's very probable that conflicts will develop. And if they are not empowered, then they will hardly change the world and the society. I think that in an alternative to the perspective of the deliberative system as a functional division of labor, the ecosystem paradigm is much more powerful to understand to what extent citizen assemblies relate to the system, to the political system, to the whole political system. In the ecosystem paradigm, is the literature on ecosystems, there is no equilibrium because you have constant imbalances. Disturbance is part of is a normal component of the ecosystem. The relations between the different parts of the ecosystem can be of mutual facilitation, of complementarity, but also of competition. You have predators and prey, you have invasive species, you have strong tensions, asymmetries, and conflicts between the elements. And I think this is more accurate to understand the world in which we are living. If you want to differentiate the two paradigms, in the functional division of labor, you have a dynamic equilibrium, you have a stability, you have development which remain normally in equilibrium, when in the ecosystem paradigm, the non-equilibrium is a rule, chance is important, steady states are not equilibrium, they are just a moment in which you have a balance. The negative changes in the mainstream deliberativist literature sees negative changes as pathologies which modify the normal functioning of the system, when in the ecosystem paradigm, disturbance is a normal component. The relation between the parts, in both paradigms you have a coupling, but in the division of labor paradigm, you have an harmonious complementarity and good coordination between the parts, when in the other paradigm, you have relations which can be of competition, and coordination is not the main element, and coordination could also be done through relations of power or domination. You have not only a functional interpretation of the deliberative system and the global socio-political system, but you think that the ecosystem of democratic innovation is not self-reproducing. And you have some invasions, and this is important. So the idea is that you have to develop some kind of sustainability, often through restoration, and not only to improve the deliberative division of labor. And to some extent, my proposal is to understand citizen assemblies and other democratic innovations as invasive spaces in the actual political system with the external and internal allies. And this is not a soft process. At least if it's a soft process, it will be powerless. It won't be a soft process. Because of this alliance, Andrea was speaking about it in his talk. It's quite clear that there are other strong invasive and internal spaces which are authoritarian or linked to vested interest, and at the time being, they are more powerful than the democratic innovations and citizen assemblies. But if we understand this, we can think about what allies we can have in these democratic innovations, and don't rest within an internalist view of citizen assemblies, or just about what citizen assemblies can bring to an harmonious system, but what are the struggles in which democratic innovations, and especially citizen assemblies, can play a role. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fascinating talk, I have to say. I got a bit lost in the in the nature and the animals, but I thought it was an extremely interesting way of also linking more directly assemblies with, indeed, as you called it, Yves, ecosystems. I've already been trying to stimulate a little bit of input in the chat, but we already had a couple of questions before, which I will just put on the table, and I hope our speakers and maybe also others will want to intervene on these questions. One question was asked earlier on is, shouldn't assemblies be particularly relevant on the local level? And I thought you could also reinterpret that a little bit in, given the fact that so many of our countries are nationally speaking going into a right-wing, and in many cases also rather authoritarian direction, to what extent are assemblies important in local urban forms of resistance to these types of processes? That might be one way of thinking about indeed making assemblies resonate. Another dimension I think is extremely important, maybe not discussed sufficiently, is particularly what Andrea put on the onto the agenda, which is also very relevant for both CitiDem, but also the other project I mentioned, Democratic Odyssey, which will be happening this Friday in Florence, and that is indeed the civil society, the NGO, the broader societal dimension to assemblies, and to what extent, for instance, if we see thousands, hundreds of thousands of people protesting in Germany that people don't want the Nazis back, to what extent can that protest also take assembly type, deliberative type of forms? I would find it very interesting if speakers would want to reflect on that. I'm not sure who wants to go. Anastasia Karatsia raised her hand, and she's going to talk a little bit later as well about a project they have at the University of Essex with many partners. But please go ahead and give us your insights.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and for the excellent presentations. I just have a question, if I may, for one of the speakers. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Melisa, thank you so much for all the examples and for the very kind of practical things to think about in terms of what do citizens' assemblies contribute. You mentioned one very interesting aspect, which is I think of particular interest to all citizens' assemblies, and it has to do with who do you involve, who do you bring to the table. And you mentioned that we should, and if I understood it correctly, we should encourage bringing in social movements. We should encourage bringing in those types of already mobilized voices to the table to sit alongside people who would not normally get a seat on the table. And I believe Yves also referred to this in his presentation. So I wondered if maybe I can get your thoughts on how would this impact on sortition as the kind of golden standard in conducting citizens assemblies? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to kick off? Maybe Lisa, as you were directly interpolated.
Yeah, sure. Just give me half a second because I'm taking notes from the
Sure.
from the questions. There we go. No, thanks so much. I mean, thanks so much also to the other speakers for their input. And I think there's a lot of alignment between what's been shared and, yeah, a more critical, so to say, perspective after the cumulative evidence that we have on citizens' assemblies from the past 15 years or so. I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of things, but I just want to get back maybe quickly, Anastasia, to your very concrete question in terms of, incorporating social movements versus upholding the gold standards of sortition. And my answer is twofold. First, that naturally socio-demographic categories are not given truths, they're constructed categories. And so when you take gender categories, when you take age brackets, when you take ethnicity, you're also not taking into consideration other identity markers that may or may not be relevant. Some assemblies, for instance, also use position, so like ideological position in terms also directly related to the remit of the assembly, for instance, in favor or against certain measures of for climate transitions, for participation in climate assemblies. So there's a number of dimensions that are at play when sortition takes place, and I think there is an objective problem when we think that social demographic and statistical criteria are the same as political criteria, because they are very much not, and they're proxies that we use to create more diverse bodies, but they're not the ultimate, so to say, category. And this is why there's ongoing, and so twofold again, my answer, there's not a gold standard really, and actually there's a lot of variation in how recruitment is made. I know of anecdotal, there's no systematization yet, but we're planning to do it. I know of anecdotal stories of how recruitment was conducted that are highly problematic and very much not random, including, for instance, replacing one brown woman with another because they just needed one, even though the person was not sorted. Just to say, again, sortition and stratified random selection as categories may sound very nice, but then the practice looks very different. On the one hand, on the other hand, I also want to raise very quickly that there are some processes that are also experimenting with different roles for organized interest and organized civil society. And so, for instance, the case that Paul mentioned at the beginning, the Democratic Odyssey, which is having an assembly here in Florence very soon. Many of us are involved in different roles with this assembly. They also have participants who are representatives of civil society organizations, even though a minority, very small numbers, in a rather large transnational assembly. But civil society participants. And so I think I saw Calypso in the audience, so maybe she can also say something about that. So TBD, information to come as to how this plays out, but that's also a possibility. But I'll give the floor to my other colleagues here, but I have more to say if we have more time later. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, time is going so fast. Yves, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to say just one thing or two things. First, although perhaps the local level is the level on which it's easier to develop citizen assemblies, I think that it must be a multi-level process, because otherwise the most important decisions remain taken at national or transnational level. And for example, Europe at the time being should be a place where citizen assemblies should be developed, and the Democratic Odyssey is an example in this. And the Global Assembly is an example at a global level. The second thing is that we have to be careful not to remain in our bubble. Social movements are not only good social movements. I mean, in the US, the Tea Party in the past, the MAGA movement, at the time being, are huge social movements. It is also organized civil society. And I think that in this, and what one could say the same thing with direct democracy. I do think that we have to develop direct democracy because electoral democracy has lost legitimacy, and because citizens want to decide directly on at least some issues. But direct democracy at the time being in Europe is also something which is reclaimed by the far right parties, and they see this in a very plebiscitarian way. And I think that in this context, citizen assemblies can be like a filter, both for social movements and for direct democracy, to try to avoid fake news, or to reduce at least fake news, and to instillate an element of good deliberation within processes which per se are not necessarily going in the good direction.
Thank you so much. The other questions coming in, and maybe we could throw them into the mix as well. Returning to the local question, a lot of the speakers indicated, I think, something that exactly speaks to the title of this webinar, that citizens' assemblies do not seem to be resonating. I know, for one, from our partner Stand Up for Europe, they did video interviews with young people in the streets of Brussels, and it was a bit like was said by Eva Jonen as well. Most people have no knowledge or maybe even interest in things like assemblies. So I wonder what you would have to share on this. I mean, maybe it could be, as Andrea very provocatively said, maybe there's no need. Maybe that's not the idea behind deliberative democracy in assemblies, etc. But on the other hand, one wonders, how does one then get, and this is a very sociological question, from, I don't know, social movements like Occupy Wall Street, doing certain type of innovative democratic things, but how do they then arrive in wider society? And effectively, if you look at Occupy Wall Street, it didn't make a huge impact, I suppose, on how democracies have been running and how they have been institutionalized. So I wondered what your position is on this. How do you think, indeed, even if you think resonance is maybe not the core function of assemblies, how can it flow in one way or the other into wider society, so that people maybe start thinking, hey, maybe deliberative negotiational interaction is better than remigration, to put it very bluntly. Not sure, maybe I'm looking at Andrea on my screen. Maybe I could ask you to take this up, okay, because I really liked your provocative position there.
And thank you. It was not meant to provoke. It's what I'm thinking these days, and it's also a bit unfortunate to think this way in some ways. But however, yeah, you have a point. If they're not there to resonate, how do we get things done in a deliberate democratic way? But I would say it's I don't know, you say in English, putting the chariot before the horses. I mean, all this insistence on citizen assemblies, I mean, they're great for research projects. They're great for measuring the outcomes, for studying them and publishing, and for looking good when small towns go to European meetings and they can show their implementation. However, they're not good for many other things, like deep democratization. So, from a deliberate democratic point of view, if you want to attain deliberate democracy without citizen assemblies, or giving them a relative role, I mean, you can try to reform the media. You can push for workplace democracy. You can advocate for many such things. The point is that we don't have the power to do that. So, as a group of people caring about democratic innovations, So there is plenty of ways to get a more deliberative society, and better so than what we can do through citizen assemblies. The problem is that we're only good at citizen assemblies, to put it a bit bluntly, and so that's what we do. Melisa was referring to links with social movements, and rightly she highlighted how challenging that is. And I agree with her. And this leads me to the point about, because it was being asked about local politics. I think local politics is the most viable place to do the kind of democratization we envisage. Nevertheless, it's fraught with difficulties. In my own experience, you never get it right. And when it comes to social movements, they're strategic actors. So they will get along with democratic innovations as long as it serves their purposes. And that's very much a welcome thing. At the same time, we cannot go all the way with full mark citizen assemblies if we serve these social movement goals, because that's not the logic. The logic of democratic innovations, when Graham Smith was theorizing it, was in many ways to keep out influences from the outside and keep the rationality within the assemblies. So nowadays we make a difference between left and right. Originally, they would have to be outside anyway. So we don't get along so well. We cannot go all the way, but we share the democratization goal, and we have to find some ways of coping. And that way of coping, we cannot rely on democratic innovation only or mainly. In my view, of course, needless to say.
Clear enough. I've got one of the participants who raised his hand, Francesco Brignoli, University of Bologna. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for letting me intervene. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
I hope so. Okay. And thank you for all these interventions to the speakers. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. I always get triggered a lot about how, and this is a comment not specifically to one of you, because I would like, maybe if you have something to say from each one of you, I'm really happy to hear. It's just a comment or also a question of two things that are kind of interconnected. The first one is the role and the intervention of digital innovation into deliberative democracy. And because now the problem is kind of a discussion now, right? From the champion of deliberative democracy, like Jürgen Habermas, is like having this new structural transformation of the public sphere. But then there are some authors that I really appreciate, some students of Habermas, like Simone Chambers, that actually say we still have the same political issue. We still have it's the same thing now. Is not the digitalization is fragmenting the public sphere more and more. We still have a problem of participating, and we may wonder if there's a way to use digitalization to actually make things easier or not, and if we want to do that or not, because for example, in a question I could ask to you, I know it's a very difficult question, but is how can you imagine AI to improve participation and discussion within a citizen assembly? Because there's a beautiful experiment of the Habermas machine by some researchers at Google and the University of Oxford. I don't remember the name of the professor. I'm really sorry about that. And it's an incredible experiment of an AI machine that actually helps people, because it follows very, very deeply the debate between the participants and kind of creates an environment of agreement. And so it's something that a normal moderator could get tired more quicker, and instead the AI doesn't get tired. The problem is also that it doesn't check the facts. It cannot check the facts, so it can resonate the misinformation of citizens. And this could lead also to my other comment, which I've been studying here at the University of Bologna and in my research, the problem of political epistemology. And the problem of political epistemology makes a deliberation and participation, you can see they are not the same thing, right? So it's once you have experts, and do you actually need laypersons? Because you need to inform people, you need to get informed people, at least also to provide experiences, to provide opinions. Those are important. We are still talking about democratic participation. The problem is to which extent do we need a preparation from citizens? Because we need to be clear in a citizen assembly to the kind of democratic demand we put on citizens' shoulders to build their motivation, in a sense, and feel the lack of knowledge they have, of course, and not only to follow blindly the expert, but actually at a certain point, I've always seen in some of the citizen assemblies I participated, some frontal lectures at a certain point. Of course, those are important, but I think still it's an epistemic divide we could reflect more on this. So thank you for your attention.
That's quite a lot of stuff on the table, I would say. Really interesting. I think you made a great point of putting the digital dimension into the mix. I'm not sure if anyone wants to react straight away. Yves, please.
Yes, just on the first point, I think your example is quite interesting. One of the problems in the discussion is to make a synthesis. It can be a consensual synthesis, but it can also lead to two alternatives that people within the assembly can vote. And if the assembly resonates in a wider public, then you have the inputs of the wider public. And again, if you have tens of inputs, it's difficult. If you have hundreds, it's even more difficult. If you have tens of thousands inputs, then how can you build a synthesis? And I think that on this, the AI is a very promising, both within the assembly and outside the assembly, to help to build a synthesis which will be much less arbitrary than when a facilitator tries as an individual to do it with good faith, but with limited capacity. So I think that this is one of the points in which technology can bring a lot of things.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess one could also say the opposite, right? How can we imagine a neutral AI interpretation of deeply politically dividing issues? I'm not entirely sure that AI would be able to ethically deal with that.
If you ask the AI to synthesize the most important polls in the debate, then the AI will do it and will reflect a polarization, which is a political polarization.
Sure, thanks. Andrea, and then Melisa as well. I see that people getting warmed up.
You're muted, Andrea.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Just two quick thoughts on the comments that were made. First one regarding role of social media, and I will just say that when I talked about reforming the media, nowadays mostly would be reforming social media, but we are not in a good position to do that in Europe since social media are not here, the big ones. However, there are social media that are continuously created from the bottom up. They are not necessarily better, but they might play a different role than those who are built exclusively for profit and not for politics. So there is that divide. That is an interesting one. And regarding AI, I'm not an expert. That's one more reason to just stick to a simple point. I'm a bit worried for the nascent practitioners industry. So I would make sure we safeguard the professionality of those people that are now giving legs to democratic innovations to walk. And so I would be curious to hear from them what they think about this development.
Wonderful, thanks. Melisa?
Yeah, thanks. A lot of points were raised, and I cannot possibly address all of them, but I will try to tie some things together. So going back, I'll come back to the AI thing, but going back to the question about prioritizing local level, shouldn't assemblies connect more to bottom-up social movements kind of initiatives? I'm generally a very critical person, but I am not as critical as Andrea, I think, in the sense that our field of inquiry and practice is a fairly reflective field, and there's huge bodies of evidence, and there have been a lot of efforts in learning from prior shortcomings in what citizens' assemblies can and cannot achieve, but also experimenting with their features and trying to find ways to make them more generative. And one of those ongoing and very recent developments has to do with precisely the potential not of citizens' assemblies, a single one-off processes, but of connecting across citizens' assemblies. So connecting, for instance, across climate assemblies, creating networks of climate assemblies very specifically, but also thinking about the ongoing proposed / question mark unclear status of the next global assembly, which would, in principle, or at least that's the proposed model, would combine a global assembly with randomly selected citizens from all over the world with local assemblies that are self-convened by communities and that can feed their contributions into an online platform. And this online platform wouldn't provide for kind of statistical representations and graphs and distributions of issues, but would add nuance and granularity to the issues on discussion. And this is what one colleague, Iñaki Goñi, calls little data. So not big data, but little data. How our communities across the world experiences issues that are global in nature, for instance. This is a proposal. This hasn't happened yet, but that is one way in which the local level can be combined, or how we can anchor, so to say, citizen deliberation also as a political project, as a project of transforming the ways we relate to each other, so to say, not only as a policy project, anchor it with decision makers through the use of a digital tool. I told you I'll come back to that point. That is one thing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, also related to the future, so to say, of citizens' assemblies and their potential capacity to resonate given all of their constraints, has to do also with the research agenda that we lead at GLOCAN on what we call grounding citizen deliberation. So many of the issues that citizens' assemblies tackle are either national or even global in nature, but then resources that, for instance, public authorities have to tackle those problems in local citizens' assemblies specifically are very limited. Very often, some of those questions, thinking about, again, climate assemblies, are way out of their jurisdiction. They cannot possibly act on those questions and issues. Instead, what we're trying to look at, very much in line with the other example that I just shared, is rather how these global issues affect communities and to what extent citizens' assemblies, as one of many other tools and forms of engagement, can empower local communities to develop issue ownership, for instance, of those issues, but also to ground global debates on their own experience, for instance, through their use of social media or to their recourse to public media. So spotlighting and foregrounding lived experience of global issues, but on the local level, where, for instance, the use of social media obviously plays a role, even if it's one strategy among many others. But I don't think citizens' assemblies are the solution to the political, and I don't think we're going to find it anytime soon. Probably it's also not desirable that we find it. But I do think that citizens' assemblies have come to stay. So they are an established player, at least in Western democracies. And so the question is not so much whether they're good or bad, but rather what can they effectively achieve, to what extent, under what conditions, and in the interplay with what other factors. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I would want to move on to the final part of our webinar, where we give a little bit of spotlight to a couple of people who will tell us about ongoing projects, upcoming events. And I've got at least 3 persons on my list. Anastasia Karatsia, who's a senior lecturer at Essex University in relation to a very interesting Horizon project on citizens' assemblies. And then the second one on my list is Michele Fiorillo from Natura Comune, who's one of the partners in our CitiDem project. And then thirdly, I have Lorenzo Minio from Humans, who's also a partner in CitiDem, and who is now very hard working on an upcoming assembly in Brussels that I think I mentioned before. So I would like to all 3 of you to ask you to keep it short, around 5 minutes, because time is running out and we violated already excessively the right to not be exposed to digital Zoom meetings. So we have to hurry up a little bit. Thanks so much.
Shall I start?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. I'll keep it short. Hello everyone. My name is Anastasia. I'm here to listen about the CitiDem project and also to share with you some information about our Horizon project called EU Assembly. Can you see my notes? Can you see my slides as notes or as a presentation?
No, as a presentation.
Perfect. Great. So yes, this is who we are. It's our team. We're a team that consists of universities, but also private organizations. We have experts in citizens' assembly. We have lawyers in the team. We have political scientists, and we have experts in intersectionality, because our project is focused on revisiting the traditional definition of a citizens' assembly, which we all know. We are here because we have an interest in these forms of citizens' participation, which are mini publics that bring together body of citizens that is democratically representative of the larger population to learn and deliberate on a topic in order to then inform public opinion and decision making. Our project aims to connect the theoretical and the practical understandings of, on the one hand, issues of intersectionality, equality, and power relations, with, on the other hand, the design of citizens' assembly. So we're aiming to design an innovative model for an EU citizens' assembly with intersectionality in the heart of it. In this sense, intersectionality is an analytical lens. It is a theoretical framework. It's a concept which helps us understand how various social identities intersect and create unique experiences of discrimination or of privilege for people. It considers the cumulative effects and the complex overlapping nature of discrimination and privilege that is caused by the fact that people belong to multiple they have multiple memberships, they have multiple different identities. It looks into the marginalization of different social groups and the power structures and the relationships that go into a person's identity and a person's belonging into social groups. As a framework, intersectionality has been used to understand barriers to participation and to representation of marginalized groups in political and democratic fora. Authors have argued that intersectionality helps us to explore how the democratic participation of individuals who belong to multiple marginalized groups is often shaped by ingrained stereotypes and prejudice, as well as structural and institutional barriers. Although this is an increasingly discussed theoretical framework, intersectionality has not yet been systematically and comprehensively integrated into deliberative democratic theory and practice. And this is where our project comes into the surface or becomes relevant, because our key research question is how do we design, implement, and evaluate democratic mechanisms to ensure that citizens, including disempowered citizens and those belonging to intersecting minorities, have an opportunity to participate in a meaningful way. We do this in the context of citizens' assembly as a one type of democratic mechanism. In this sense, we aim to, first of all, map selected existing citizen assemblies within the European Union and selected member states to see how intersectionality, how and whether it has played a role in the organization and the implementation of those assemblies. We will then examine the inclusiveness of those citizen assemblies from a theoretical intersectionality perspective, with a focus on selected case studies that are drawn from the EU and the national level. A part of our project is to evaluate the experiences of people who have taken place in those citizen assemblies, but also those who have been involved in their organization and in their implementation in practice, with a focus on intersectionality and equality issues. And finally, we aim to identify or to design 3 plausible models for citizens' assemblies, which we will test, one at the local, one at the national, and one at the transnational level, where we consider variables and issues of intersectional equality and how they can play out in practice in forums of civic engagement. And finally, in defining the main traits of the pilot citizens assembly, we aim to develop a prototype for a citizens assembly with, as I said, intersectionality in its center. A few words on where we are at the moment. We are reaching the end of our first year of the project, where we worked on developing our theoretical and our analytical framework. We have engaged in our empirical analysis, which is based on the theoretical framework and aims to become the foundation for our pilot design. And we are starting the process of designing our 3 pilots. Some of our, let's say, a key substantive finding so far is that intersectionality, if we want to create more inclusive citizen assemblies based on the principles of equality and good deliberation, then intersectionality should run through the design choices that we make for that citizens assembly, from the questions of governance, organization, and management, to issues of selection and recruitment of participants, hence my question earlier to the presenters of the first session, to how we design and realize the facilitation and deliberation processes. Along these lines, there are some cross-cutting factors that have to do with language, disability, some general demographic factors in inclusion, which again must be specifically and attentively designed through the lenses of intersectionality. So I promise to keep this short. Please follow our journey. We have a website. We have a social media presence. We look forward to exploring avenues for collaboration with many of you who are part of this project and of this webinar today. And thank you very much for giving me the time to present our project here.
Thank you so much. And well, we from CitiDem and CTOE will definitely reach out to you later, because I know some of your other work on ECIs. And one of the things that we have in the pipeline is an ECI on democratic reform. And so your expertise would be most useful there. Thank you so much for this short presentation of the Horizon project. Time is running out, but we still have a couple of persons who I would really want to give the spotlight. The first one is Michele Fiorillo.
Yes.
Okay.
So I go straight to the point. Yeah. Can I go?
Sure.
Thanks, Paul, and everyone, especially Paul, to organize this seminar, and thanks to the speakers. All very interesting to reflect and also to enact, I would say, jointly. So you just mentioned, Paul, the European Citizen Initiative, which could be one of the ways Citizen Assembly could try also to reach the maxi public and somehow really influence institutionally, for instance, European institution, and not only. I just put in the chat a link to an article that was published by Domani, which is quite influential on the progressive public opinion in Italy. That gave space actually to our attempt to create, starting from our NGO Natura Comune, but bridging with other well-known NGOs, you may know Mediterranea, and all a series of NGOs that are working with welcoming migrants, and give also them the possibility to give a meaningful contribution to Italian society. Especially we connected with the Riace, with the former mayor and now again mayor of Riace, Mimmo Lucano. Maybe you may have heard about him and his struggle also against Salvini, that when was Minister of the Internal Affairs in Italy, was opposing many attempts, including the one of Lucano in Riace, to give dignitous welcoming to migrants, also overcoming this opposition between we Italians, we Europeans, and the others, but trying to build up a community where can spring out a new witness in a way. So what we try to do, connecting all this reality and best practices or good practices of welcoming migrants in Italy, was and is, because the process is still ongoing, is to build up a popular, in Italian we call it legge di iniziativa popolare, or I guess in English is a popular initiative law, I don't know, which is a sort of ECI at national level, but theoretically more influential in the sense that you collect in Italy only 50,000 signatures, and any Italian citizen, any NGO can initiate these signatures collecting on a text. You write a text, really a legislative text, and you collect these signatures, and then you propose this law to the parliament, Italian parliament, that actually discuss it in the commission, the committee of the parliament that has to deal with the matter the proposal you present, and then maybe or not. Of course, this is discretionality, be presented in the plenary of the parliament and then approved. In Italy, there are very, very few cases of this enacting of a popular initiative law, but we will try our chance. And what we are doing, why this is relevant for our discussion, that because we are trying to build up this popular initiative law text, also leveraging with citizen assemblies. Well, you know, the citizen assembly, then it's a bit, it's becoming a sort of ideal type for civil society movements. So the aim is a citizen assembly then, and we know this very well also with CitiDem, the resources are limited. You don't always have the support of a public administration, so you don't have sortition. Or you have partially. What we have done, for instance, in Lecce, with this another project, some of NGOs here present, like Democracy International, are also involved. The name is Bridge Europe. We try to create a sort of prototype of a Mediterranean citizen assembly, inviting experts from different sides of the Mediterranean Sea, and we invited, thanks to the EU funding, people from different countries of Europe, and we had also
Mich-
PhDs from
Michele.
Egypt, Croatia. Yes. Okay.
Could I ask you to wrap up because time is really running out?
Yeah, just finish it. So what we have done was, of course, the assembly was constructed a bit by invitation and self-selection of the participants in Lecce. But what we have used the element of sortition to create the working groups that elaborated recommendation, and so we're like transnational recommendation for an Italian popular initiative Italian law. So in a way we try, and of course there was a participation in Lecce also by the side of many NGOs and movements dealing with this matter of welcoming migrants and contrasting fascist tendencies on pushing back migrants.
Thanks so much. That's spot on, I would say.
Thanks to you, and sorry to be long.
No worries. We really have to wrap up, but last but not least, we have Lorenzo Minio from Humans, who is actually doing the hard work in CitiDem by organizing the first transnational assembly in Brussels. So he's a bit of a hero, I think. The floor is yours, Lorenzo.
No, thank you, Paul. But I assume we are all heroes here because also Paul is coming to Brussels for the first for the kickoff of the assemblies of the CitiDem project. And in this case, Humans, which is a pan-European movement by popular initiative. So we don't run for election. We only try to activate direct democracy and participatory democracy. And in the framework of the CitiDem project, with many of the CitiDem partners that will be also present at this event. I don't know if we can circulate maybe in the chat the link. Oh, you already did it, Paul. Thank you. So in this event, we will, I could call it a matryoshka because it's a social experiment of social innovation. But at the same time, we propose and we discuss in this event of democratic innovation. So it's a kind of a matryoshka in this sense. But we will discuss about how European democracy and in particular the tools of participatory democracy, so the existing tool, petitioning, European Citizens Initiative, they are not strong enough to promote a social impact. And so we will start by studying on the first day, on the 7th of March at the University of Brussels. We will start by studying the existing instrument, their weaknesses, and also their strength. And then starting from that, we will also explore some of the best practices around the world, including the Taiwan experience. Professor Gianluca Sgueo will in particular speak about that. So in innovative experience of digital democracy, for instance, and how we could try to imitate these and institutionalize those practices in the EU. So on the first day, on the 7th of March, I repeat, at the University of Brussels, I won't do now the list of all the speakers, but of course we will have Calypso Nicolaidis, Jane Suter from the Dublin University, we will have Daniela Vancic from Democracy International and many others. On the first day, this will be an informative day on the 7th of March. So it's open to everyone, and only everyone can come and participate to this informative session. And on the second day, we will have a deliberative session. So only 50 randomly selected participants will be proposing and discussing at around, of course, round tables, working groups. They will be divided in working groups and discuss with the help of facilitators, of course, some proposals according to what they learned on the first day. Now, I just a couple of things. We are perfectly aware this is just an experience. an experiment. It's not a proper citizen assembly because only 2 days not enough to study all that should be studied, but we wanted to launch, to start a debate on why we are stuck with the reform of participatory tools in the European Union after that the Conference on the Future of Europe already proposed something. So we will try to start by with this debate. So what was done and what was not done regarding what was issued from citizens' proposal on the Conference of Future of Europe relating in particular with direct democracy reforms. And starting by that, we will issue those proposals and we can consider to transform them petition to the European Parliament, just to, push forward this request of democratic reform to improve instruments of direct democracy within the European Union. So we know that it's not perfect and it's not the perfect structure of a citizen assembly. At the same time, we are self-promoting this together with the partner of CitiDem, and we think that the institution should have maybe helped us a bit. We requested database from citizens for the random selection, but we didn't succeed in receiving them. So we will do this random selection starting from those who already proposed to participate to this event. We know there is a bias on this, but we try to be transparent and say things as they are. At the same time, I think it's a useful experiment that can be an example for other assemblies of this consortium of the CitiDem project. And you're very welcome to come. And maybe then, after the result, we must work together to see how we make listen our how the EU should listen to our request, and so we need to have a common effort on this. And I'm sure that thanks to the work of coordination of Paul, we will do it brilliantly.
I wonder. Thank you so much. I wonder if my coordination will be that helpful, but I'll do my best. Thank you so much, Lorenzo, for these final words on a really interesting assembly, and I'm sure it will be a wonderful event. I wanted to thank all the speakers. Some of them unfortunately already had to leave, but I really wanted to thank you for your fantastic input, fantastic debate, and of course also all the participants. We're still some 30 participants after a 2-hour-long ride on complex deliberative stuff. So I find it quite an achievement. Thank you so much. There will be other webinars and other events that CitiDem is organizing. I also put in the chat already. There will be in a month's time exactly a book seminar with Nadia Urbinati on her book, The Lotocratic Mentality, which is definitely also interesting. And well, I hope you all followed what has been posted in the chat. There's the Democratic Odyssey, which is really imminent this Friday already. And so if you didn't book a plane ticket yet to Florence, do that immediately, I would say, if you manage to. If not, we hope to see you in any of the other events that we will be organizing soon. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And hope to speak to you sometime soon. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao,
Have a nice
ciao.
evening.
Ciao, everyone.